The ink on the divorce papers was still wet when Victoria Reynolds watched her husband of 8 years, Daniel Morrison, sign the $30 billion infrastructure contract that would reshape the American energy sector. She stood in the back of the glass-walled conference room at Morrison Tech Solutions, her graduation gown still draped over her arm, the MBA she'd earned that very morning, now feeling like a cruel joke. Daniel's hand moved across the signature line with the same fluid motion he'd used 3 hours earlier to end their marriage. His fingers intertwined with her former study partner, Jennifer Walsh, who now wore Victoria's grandmother's engagement ring. The company representative extending the contract wore a tailored charcoal suit with a silver pin Victoria recognized instantly. The emblem of Apex Industries, the top infrastructure conglomerate in North America. What Daniel didn't know, what Jennifer couldn't have suspected, was that the woman he'd divorced on his wife's graduation day to marry her best friend owned the very company whose contract he was signing. Victoria had inherited Apex Industries from her late mother 6 months ago, a fact she'd kept hidden while working minimum wage jobs to put Daniel through his startup phase, while completing her own degree in secret. The $30 billion contract Daniel was signing contained a morality clause, a performance review system, and a cancellation provision that Victoria herself had drafted. As Jennifer kissed Daniel's cheek in celebration and whispered something that made him laugh, the same laugh Victoria used to cherish, a single question burned through her mind. How would the man who divorced his wife on her graduation day, unaware she owned the top company signing his $30 billion contract, react when the truth shattered everything he thought he'd built? And what would Jennifer do when she realized the best friend she'd betrayed held the power to destroy them both? The Georgetown University graduation ceremony had been beautiful. Victoria Reynolds had walked across that stage at 9:47 a.m., accepting her MBA diploma with honors, scanning the crowd for the one face that mattered. Daniel's seat, the one she'd reserved in the third row, the one that had cost her an extra $100 to guarantee, remained empty. She'd felt the weight of that absence like a stone in her chest, but she'd smiled for the cameras anyway, thinking perhaps he'd been delayed at the office. Perhaps the contract signing had run long. She hadn't expected to find him in their apartment at noon, suitcases already packed. "I need to talk to you about something," Daniel had said, and Victoria had foolishly thought he wanted to apologize for missing her graduation. She'd set down her diploma, still in its leather holder, on the kitchen counter they'd picked out together at IKEA 3 years ago. The same counter where she'd served him breakfast every morning before her 6 a.m. shift at the diner. Before her 8 a.m. classes, before rushing home to help him prepare investor presentations. "I want a divorce." 3 words, 21 letters, 8 years dissolved. "There's someone else," he'd continued, and Victoria had felt the room tilt. "Someone who understands my vision. Someone who's been there for me during the hard times." Jennifer had emerged from their bedroom then, their bedroom, wearing one of Victoria's robes, her red hair cascading over shoulders that Victoria had cried on countless times. Jennifer, who'd borrowed Victoria's notes when she'd been too sick to attend class. Jennifer, who'd sworn she'd never betray their friendship. Jennifer, who'd apparently been doing much more than studying with Daniel during all those late nights Victoria had been working double shifts. "I'm sorry, Vicky," Jennifer had said, but her eyes had been cold, calculating. "But Daniel deserves someone who can actually help his career. Not someone who works at a diner." Victoria had felt something crack inside her chest. They didn't know. Neither of them knew. 6 months ago, Victoria's mother, Eleanor Chen Reynolds, the steel magnolia of American infrastructure, had died in a car accident in Singapore while finalizing a deal with the Pacific Rim Coalition. The will had been read in a private office in Manhattan, and Victoria had inherited everything. Apex Industries, valued at $87 billion, with projects spanning 43 countries and contracts with 18 governments. She'd also inherited her mother's instructions, handwritten on cream-colored stationery in Eleanor's perfect script. "Don't tell anyone until you know who loves you for you and who loves you for what you can give them. Your father learned this lesson too late. Don't make the same mistake." So Victoria had kept working at Morrison's Diner, which she actually owned through a shell corporation, though the manager didn't know it. She'd kept taking the bus to campus, kept darning Daniel's socks, kept pretending she was just a girl trying to earn her degree, while supporting her husband's dreams. She'd wanted to be sure. She'd wanted Daniel to succeed on his own merit first, to see if he'd still love her when he didn't need her money anymore. Now standing in their apartment with divorce papers in her hand and her best friend wearing her jewelry, Victoria understood her mother's wisdom with devastating clarity. "I'm taking the apartment," Daniel had said. "My lawyer says since I've been the primary breadwinner." Victoria had almost laughed. The apartment was in a building she owned. The car he drove was registered to one of her subsidiary companies. The laptop he'd used to build his business had been purchased through a vendor she controlled. But she'd said nothing, just signed the papers with the pen he offered. A Mont Blanc she'd given him for their 5th anniversary, purchased with her mother's first gift to her, though Daniel had believed it came from Victoria's Christmas bonus. "The contract signing is at 2, Jennifer had said, checking her phone, an iPhone Victoria had bought her last birthday. "We should get going, baby. This is your big day." This is your big day. The words had been meant for Victoria that morning, should have been said about her graduation. Instead, they were about Daniel's contract, the one that would make Morrison Tech Solutions a legitimate player in the energy sector. Victoria had gathered her things, only what was truly hers, only what had existed before Daniel, and left. She'd walked 17 blocks in her graduation gown, drawing stares until she reached the Starbucks where her driver was waiting. Marcus Chen, no relation to her mother, despite the shared surname, had opened the door of the black Mercedes S-Class with the tinted windows that she used for business. "To the office, Miss Reynolds?" "No," Victoria had said. "To Morrison Tech Solutions. I want to see this contract signing." Marcus had raised an eyebrow. He'd been her mother's driver for 20 years and knew how to read the room, but he'd simply nodded. "As you wish." Now standing in the back of Morrison Tech's conference room, Victoria watched her ex-husband's moment of triumph with the detached interest of an entomologist observing an insect. She'd entered through the building's executive entrance, the one Daniel didn't even know existed because his company only leased the 3rd floor of a building Apex Industries owned. The security guard had recognized her immediately. All Apex employees had been briefed on their new CEO's face and had ushered her in with a deference that would have confused Daniel had he noticed. But Daniel hadn't noticed. He was too busy shaking hands with Robert Chen, Apex Industries Senior VP of Contract Administration, and Victoria's mother's younger brother, her uncle, though Daniel had no idea of the connection. Uncle Robert's expression was carefully neutral, professional, betraying nothing of the fury Victoria knew he felt on her behalf. He'd wanted to cancel the contract the moment he'd learned about the divorce, but Victoria had stopped him. "Let it play out," she'd said. "I want to see what he does when he thinks he's won." The conference room was full of Morrison Tech employees, investors, and hangers-on. Jennifer stood beside Daniel, her hand possessively on his arm, whispering congratulations. She'd changed since their apartment, now wearing a designer dress Victoria didn't recognize, probably purchased in anticipation of her new life as a tech entrepreneur's wife. Daniel was making a speech. "This contract represents everything Morrison Tech has been working toward. $30 billion to redesign the Eastern Seaboard's energy infrastructure to bring American innovation to American problems. This is about legacy, about building something that lasts." Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from Uncle Robert. "Are you sure about this?" She typed back. "Absolutely. Proceed with the standard terms." What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't know because he'd never actually read the fine print of Apex contracts, too dazzled by the dollar signs, was that every Apex agreement included a 90-day performance review clause with a morality provision. Any behavior deemed inconsistent with Apex Industries' values of family, integrity, and loyalty could trigger an immediate contract review and potential cancellation with full financial penalties. Victoria's mother had implemented the clause 15 years ago after a contractor in Mumbai had abandoned his wife and children for a mistress, then used company funds to support his new lifestyle. Eleanor had been raised by a single mother after her own father had done the same, and she'd vowed no company under her control would ever reward such behavior. The clause was ironclad. Apex's legal team had defended it successfully in 7 countries, and Victoria had just watched Daniel trigger it 3 hours into his marriage to her former best friend. Daniel signed the contract with a flourish. Cameras flashed. Jennifer kissed him again. Longer this time. making sure everyone saw. Someone popped champagne. The celebration was beginning. Victoria slipped out before anyone could recognize her, though she caught Uncle Robert's eye as she left. He nodded once, understanding. The real work would begin tomorrow. She had Marcus drive her to her real office, the penthouse suite of the Apex Industries Tower in downtown Seattle, a glass and steel monument to her mother's vision. Victoria's assistant, Caroline Wright, was waiting with files, contracts, and a cup of Earl Grey tea prepared exactly how Victoria liked it. The Morrison Tech contract is signed, Caroline said. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the demeanor of a general. She'd been Eleanor's assistant and had transitioned seamlessly to Victoria. Legal is preparing the review documentation. We should have everything ready within 48 hours. Good. Victoria sat down behind her mother's desk, her desk now, and looked out at the Seattle skyline. I want a full audit of every Morrison Tech transaction for the past 3 years. Financial records, vendor relationships, employee contracts, everything. You think there's more? Caroline asked. I know there is. Victoria opened the Morrison Tech file on her computer. Jennifer Walsh was hired as their head of strategic partnerships 8 months ago, recommended by Daniel personally. She's been signing off on vendor contracts, consultant agreements, expense reports. You think they've been embezzling? I think Jennifer has been planning this for a while. Victoria pulled up a series of transactions. Look at these consulting fees. Morrison Tech has paid $340,000 to Walsh Consulting LLC over the past 6 months for strategic advice. Jennifer created that company 3 days after she was hired. Caroline leaned in, studying the screen. That's a conflict of interest at minimum, possibly fraud. And it gets better. Victoria opened another file. Daniel took out a $2 million loan from First National Bank last month to expand operations. But look at the collateral he used, intellectual property that Morrison Tech doesn't actually own. The patents are licensed from a subsidiary of Apex Industries. He's used our IP to secure a loan for his company. That's a material breach of the licensing agreement. It is. Victoria sat back. And when we exercise our right to audit under the morality clause, all of this becomes our business. Every shady deal, every cut corner, every lie he's told to make his company look more successful than it is. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Your mother would be proud and furious. She warned me. Victoria touched the picture on her desk. Eleanor at 50, standing in front of the Shanghai office, looking like she could stare down a typhoon. She said, "Never let a man make you small." I didn't listen. I made myself small for 8 years, thinking it would make him love me more. You were supporting him. That's not making yourself small. Wasn't it? Victoria's voice was bitter. I worked at a diner I secretly owned so he wouldn't feel emasculated by my inheritance. I pretended to struggle with tuition I'd already paid in full. I acted like his $30 billion contract was a miracle instead of something I approved personally. I made myself small, and he still left me for someone he thought was bigger. So now you show him how wrong he was. Now I show him the cost of his choices. The next morning, Daniel woke up to find his life unraveling. It started with a phone call from First National Bank. The $2 million loan he'd secured was being called in immediately due to irregularities in the collateral documentation. He had 72 hours to repay it in full or face legal action. Then his head of operations, Thomas Rivera, walked into his office with a resignation letter. I got an offer from Stellar Energy, Thomas said. It's too good to pass up. Stellar Energy? Daniel frowned. I've never heard of them. They're a subsidiary of Apex Industries. They offered me twice my salary and a position that actually matches my experience level. 3 more employees resigned by lunch, all hired by Apex subsidiaries. By the end of the day, Daniel had lost his entire senior engineering team. Jennifer was panicking. This can't be a coincidence. Someone's targeting us. It's just bad timing, Daniel said, but his voice was uncertain. It happens. We'll hire new people. With what money? We just got hit with that loan recall. Daniel called his bank, his lawyer, anyone who might have answers. No one knew anything. Everything was perfectly legal. The loan recall was standard procedure for documentation issues. The employees leaving was just the market at work. Uncle Robert called at 4:47 p.m. Mr. Morrison, this is Robert Chen from Apex Industries. I'm calling to inform you that we'll be exercising our right to a 30-day performance and compliance audit as stipulated in Section 14, Paragraph 7 of your contract. Daniel's blood ran cold. An audit? We just signed the contract yesterday. The contract includes provisions for random audits at any time within the first 90 days. This is standard procedure for all contracts exceeding $10 billion. We'll need full access to your financial records, personnel files, and operational documentation. Our team will arrive Monday morning. This is outrageous. You can't just... Mr. Morrison, I'm simply following the contract terms that you signed. If you'd like to review the relevant sections, I'm happy to send them over. Have a good weekend. The line went dead. Jennifer was staring at him. What did they say? They're auditing us in 3 days. But we're not ready for an audit. Daniel, there are things... What things? Jennifer's face went pale. The consulting fees, the vendor markups. I was going to tell you about them, but... What consulting fees? What vendor markups? The truth came out in pieces, each revelation worse than the last. Jennifer had been skimming money from Morrison Tech for months, inflating consultant fees and pocketing the difference. She'd created shell companies, fake vendors, phantom employees. She'd stolen over $600,000. I was doing it for us, Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. So we could have a nice life together. So we could afford the wedding I wanted, the house, everything. You were doing it before we were even together. I knew you'd leave Victoria eventually. I was planning ahead. I was investing in our future. Daniel felt sick. This was the woman he'd left his wife for. This was the person he'd thought understood his vision. If Apex finds this during the audit, we're done, Daniel said. They'll cancel the contract. They'll sue us. We'll lose everything. So we hide it. We create new documentation. Backdate everything. That's fraud, Jennifer. That's prison. But it was already too late. The audit was coming. And with his senior team gone, with his financials in chaos, with Jennifer's crimes waiting to be discovered, Daniel knew there was no way out. On Monday morning, the Apex audit team arrived. They were thorough, professional, and utterly merciless. They found every irregularity, every suspicious transaction, every cut corner. They interviewed employees, reviewed contracts, examined bank records. By Wednesday, Uncle Robert was back in Daniel's office with a document marked breach of contract. Mr. Morrison, Apex Industries is exercising its right to immediately terminate the infrastructure contract due to multiple material breaches of our agreement. Additionally, we're pursuing legal action for fraud, misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. You can't do this. That contract is worth $30 billion. The contract is worth nothing if you can't fulfill its terms. And given what we've discovered, you never could have. Uncle Robert's voice was ice. Your company is built on lies, Mr. Morrison. Fake credentials, embezzled funds, stolen intellectual property. Did you really think no one would notice? I didn't know about Jennifer's, but you knew about the collateral fraud. You knew you were using IP you didn't own to secure loans. You knew your company was overvalued by at least 40%. You built a house of cards and hoped no one would blow on it. Daniel's lawyer tried to negotiate. Apex's legal team demolished every argument. The morality clause alone was enough to void the contract, but the financial irregularities made it ironclad. Morrison Tech would be sued for $15 million in damages, legal fees, and breach penalties. By Friday, Morrison Tech was bankrupt. The investors were fleeing. The employees were gone. Jennifer had been arrested for embezzlement and fraud, led away in handcuffs while photographers captured every moment for the business press. Daniel sat in his empty office. The office in the building he just learned was owned by Apex Industries, which meant he was being evicted, and tried to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. His phone rang, an unknown number. Hello? Hello, Daniel, it's Victoria. His heart stopped. Victoria, I don't know what to say. Then let me say it for you. Victoria's voice was calm, controlled. You divorced me on my graduation day. The day I earned the MBA I got while working 3 jobs to support your dreams. You divorced me for my best friend, who was stealing from your company. You divorced me to sign a $30 billion contract with a company you didn't know I owned. What? Apex Industries, Daniel. I own it. I inherited it from my mother 6 months ago. I've owned it this entire time. The contract you signed? I approved it personally. The audit? I ordered it. Everything that's happened to you in the past week? I made it happen. Daniel couldn't breathe. You did this? You destroyed my company, my life, because I left you? No. Victoria's voice hardened. I destroyed your company because it was built on fraud and lies. I destroyed your relationship because it was built on betrayal and theft. I didn't have to do anything except tell the truth, Daniel. You destroyed yourself. But the contract was real. If you'd been honest, if you'd run your company with integrity, if you'd treated people with respect, you would have succeeded. Morrison Tech could have been legitimate, but you took shortcuts. You lied. You used people. And when that's your foundation, everything falls apart eventually. I just accelerated the process. I loved you, Daniel said, and he was crying now. I really did love you, Victoria. No, you didn't. You loved what I did for you. You loved having someone who made you feel important, who sacrificed everything for your dreams. But you never saw me, Daniel. You never asked what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what I was capable of. You kept me small because it made you feel big. I'm sorry, God, Victoria, I'm so sorry. I know you are. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you lost everything. But you're not sorry for what you did to me. You're not sorry for missing my graduation, for divorcing me on the happiest day of my life, for humiliating me with my best friend. You're sorry you're facing consequences. What do you want from me? Nothing. I don't want anything from you anymore. I just wanted you to know who did this and why. I wanted you to understand that actions have consequences, that treating people like they're disposable comes with a price. So this is revenge? No, Daniel. This is justice. Revenge would be me destroying you for the sake of destroying you. Justice is me ensuring that your behavior, your fraud, your betrayals, your cruelty, doesn't get rewarded with a $30 billion contract. Justice is protecting the thousands of people who would have been affected by your company's failures. Justice is making sure Jennifer faces consequences for her crimes. You're heartless. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. I worked at a diner for 8 years when I had $87 billion in the bank. I put you through every stage of your business while completing my own degree in secret. I gave you everything I had and you threw it away for someone who was stealing from you. And I'm heartless? So what happens now? Now you rebuild your life if you can. You face your legal consequences. You learn from this, or you don't. I don't care anymore. I have a company to run, contracts to fulfill, people who depend on me. I have my mother's legacy to honor and my own path to forge. You're just someone I used to know. Victoria! But she'd already hung up. Daniel sat in the darkness of his empty office and finally understood what he'd lost. Not just a wife, but a partner. Not just support, but love. Not just help, but someone who'd believed in him enough to sacrifice everything. And he'd thrown it away for someone who'd never loved him at all. 3 months later, Victoria stood in front of the Apex Industries Board of Directors and presented her plan for the Eastern Seaboard Energy Infrastructure Project. The contract that had been meant for Morrison Tech had been redistributed to 4 smaller companies, all minority-owned, all with proven track records of integrity and excellence. My mother built this company on the principle that business should make the world better, Victoria said. That means we reward integrity, not just ambition. We invest in people, not just profits. And we never, ever compromise our values for convenience. The board approved her plan unanimously. Uncle Robert walked her to her office afterward. Eleanor would be proud, he said. You handled that with grace. I handled it with the tools she gave me, Victoria replied. The company, the contracts, the resources. But also the wisdom to know that being powerful doesn't mean being cruel. It means using your power wisely. And Daniel Morrison is serving 18 months for loan fraud. Jennifer Walsh got 3 years for embezzlement. Their story's over. And yours is just beginning. Victoria looked out at the Seattle skyline. at the city full of projects her company was building, at the future she was creating not just for herself, but for the thousands of people who worked for Apex Industries, who depended on the contracts they fulfilled, who trusted the company her mother had built and she was now leading. "Yes," she said, "it is." That evening, Victoria returned to her apartment, the penthouse she'd bought after the divorce, with views of Elliott Bay and enough space for the life she was building. She changed out of her business suit into comfortable clothes, made herself tea, and sat down with her laptop. She had an email from the dean of Georgetown's business school. They wanted her to speak at next year's graduation ceremony to share her story with the new graduates. Victoria smiled and began typing her response. She had a story to tell now about resilience and justice, about knowing your worth and never making yourself small for anyone, about the power of patience, the importance of integrity, and the cost of betrayal. It was a story that started with a graduation she'd attended alone and a divorce delivered on the same day. But it was also a story about how she'd taken that pain, that humiliation, that devastation, and transformed it into something powerful. The man who'd divorced her on her graduation day, unaware she owned the top company signing his $30 billion contract, had learned the truth too late. What she'd done had shocked him, crushed him, left him devastated. But that wasn't the end of the story. The end was Victoria Reynolds, CEO of Apex Industries, standing in front of a new generation of graduates, telling them that their worth isn't determined by who values them, but by how they value themselves. That success built on integrity lasts, while success built on lies crumbles. That the people who make you feel small don't deserve to be part of your story. Daniel Morrison became a cautionary tale in business schools, an example of hubris and fraud. Jennifer Walsh became a case study in corporate crime. But Victoria Reynolds became something else entirely. She became the woman she was always meant to be.